Hello and welcome to the Strength and Flexibility Summit presented by Nirvana Strength. I'm Ian Mcleod, co-founder and head coach. We will be speaking with some of the highest level coaches and practitioners in the world to get a better understanding of functional strength and active flexibility. You'll be taking away a wealth of knowledge on some of the most effective and safest ways to improve yourself and take your performance to the next level. On this session, we'll be speaking with Emmett Lewis, founder of M3, Modern Method of Mobility, co-creator of Handstand Factory. Emmett Lewis is known as the Splits Wizard and is a big proponent of full range strength. Having graduated from the National Centre of Circus Arts, London, he has a strong foundation in which he used to transition into the fitness industry, coaching everything from flexibility, hand balancing to personal development. Emmet is committed to disseminating information via his YouTube channel with the aim of creating a more open source community, providing access to flexibility training ideas and methodologies to as many people as possible, as well as demystifying the process of gaining flexibility. So without further ado, Emmett, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Thank you for inviting me to attend this. I look forward to seeing what the other speakers are bringing as well. So
Yeah,
it's all
no
good
problem.
to,
It's quite interesting it's been an interesting process, getting all the speakers to come on and really thinking about all these different ideas that aren't really kind of found in course books or textbooks. Like
yeah.
it's kind of all these like little secrets that everybody has, and we're trying to, mine them out of your brain now. But I think too, like anybody that is familiar with you and familiar with your YouTube channel and even what's available on your website, clearly like there's a wealth of information and knowledge that is already readily available via your
Yeah.
channels. And so that is kind of something that is quite unique, I think, among different kind of like practitioners and what is actually seen, because you do see that there's like quite a large amount of information that people try to like essentially hide or they keep for themselves. And
Yeah.
it also seems to kind of go against the idea of like what we should be doing with regards to like promoting like health and some level of independence with our client and member base.
Yeah.
So something to kind of think about and to kind of start the conversation with is your transition from that circus life, dealing with circus athletes, other circus performers, and then transitioning into the fitness industry. Like, what have been some of the differences and the big challenges with regards to maybe now you're dealing with more like relatively like normal people?
Yeah. I think it's this kind of thing when we're dealing with clients. We always have this perfect idea. Everyone always goes in like, I have this perfect idea, this perfect client who gives me 100% adherence and will do everything and has basically unlimited time and unlimited recovery capacity and no stresses outside of what happens in this like ice box of our training. Oops, smacking my mic. The ice box of our training. And it just doesn't work like this. And this was the biggest kind of transition for me when I was dealing with circus people. I'm dealing with people who are basically, it took a while to realize it, but they are, I'm not going to say genetically elite, but they are the elite in terms of the amount of time spent training something. For someone to get to the point to be say a circus acrobat or work in a circus school or this kind of thing, they have generally been a dancer, a gymnast, done youth circus, something for a very long time, and then they become a pro circus person. So then you're dealing with someone who has all the adaptations, all the training, and all the background implicit knowledge that goes along with the training, so you can give this. Whereas when we're dealing with someone, just a normal person who wants to get in shape, it's like if we try to train them the way we would train an acrobat or a gymnast who also has 15 years of background experience, it just doesn't work. It's just not the way it should be approached. We need to actually have a pedagogy that can bring an adult through this kind of training, through the practice, through the adaptations we get, and then we can train them in the way we want. So it comes down to what I term the three W's. This is what kind of forced me to come up with this. Like, who am I speaking to?
Mm.
Like, literally, who am I speaking to? A 17-year-old who wants to go to circus school is not the same person as a 43-year-old with 4 kids. They're very different people. They have very different lifestyle expectations. And to give the training with the 17-year-old whose parents pay his bills, has no job stress, and to give that training to the same 43-year-old would destroy the 43-year-old, and vice versa. If I gave the 43-year-old's training to the 17-year-old, it just wouldn't do anything. And this is the kind of thing. So we're looking like, who are we speaking to? And narrowing in on more and more of these details and what's going on in someone's life actually is what really makes your training work and effective. Whereas like it's the classic mistake I see. Like I deal with this about twice a week, or maybe not twice a week back in the day, probably about twice a month nowadays, where I'll have someone contact me for online training, and they have trained generally with someone who is an Edo student or back of this, and they give them the program that they got from Edo or something similar, where it's like 2 sessions a day, a lot of volume. The volume is always escalating, and the person, like, it works. Don't get me wrong, but then the person breaks or just can't handle it, and then there's no adaptation of the training to the person. And then they get in touch with me or other coaches and we're like, oh, well, actually, maybe you don't need to train 10 times a week. You could train 5 times a week because you got kids, or 4 times a week even. And, it'll take you 5 years to reach your goals instead of 3 years. But that's okay, because training is a long-term advice. It's this kind of stepping away from the immediacy of results and looking. It's the one thing I program for more so than anything else, is consistency is a variable. If you have not diagnosed your person and not got a good, adequate picture of them, you will not be able to provide a training plan that they will be able to do consistently for the long period of time. And this is the one thing we should be aiming for. If we're working, this is the thing, this is the freedom we have when we're working with people who are outside of athletic spectrum, where they have to be prepped and they have to be ready at an exact date, and it has to be 100%, and everything has to come together at that point. When we're dealing with people who are not athletes and don't have a time constraint, then we have to be able to go, well, actually, it's good. Sometimes we push hard. Other times we have to know when to back off. Sometimes we have to go like, okay, let's train twice a week and let's just take it easy. Okay, you got some time coming up. You want to be shredded for the beach holiday. Let's train 6 times a week. Let's do some extra. But knowing when to push and when to pull back, and knowing who you're talking to, is the biggest transition I had from someone who is like, say, a circus artist who's like, this is my job. I will train 5 days a week as my normal training for 3 to 4 hours. I can take my time with my training, and then I'll do 2 gigs at the weekend, and that's the only work I'll have to do all week. And the gigs are so easy of a level because you're using your performance level skills. It's straightforward. So this kind of gives you an idea of what we have to look at. The next thing is like, well, what does this person want to do? Like, literally just what do they want to do? It's like someone comes and go like, what do you want to do? Okay, you need to have a clear idea. You need to actually know what they mean. This is the kind of thing that can catch a lot of people out. Maybe if someone goes like, oh, I want to do, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's like, oh, I want to do soft acrobatics and flow across the ground. And you go, well, why do you want to do that? And it's like, well, it's going to make me feel freer. And you go, well, what are you going to do out of this? And it's like, do you want to perform with it? Awesome. We have a context that this skill is going to be in. Or someone's like, oh, I want to do soft acrobatics so I can move across the ground better, so I can chase my children. Maybe you don't need to learn soft acrobatics unless you really want to. Maybe we just need to work on general movement capacity, not even capacity, just general movement, and just, get you used to going up and down to the floor and not have a huge flexibility demand. So just kind of, we have to give a context to what someone wants to do, and then this will dictate how much training we have to do and whether it's possible. So we've assessed the person, we've had a chat, and we go, okay, you can literally, you're 50-year-old, you're stressed, you can handle probably 3 training sessions a week, but you want a 1-arm handstand, and you've never done handstands before. Well, it's possible, don't get me wrong, but you have to give me something. So if you say that to me, then maybe I need 6 training sessions a week.
Yeah.
Or this, like, there has to be, this will give you the context. And then what is the bigger question is like, where are these people in relation to the skill? Where are they in the flexibility and mobility and the control components? Where are they in terms of coordinative capacity? Where are they in familiarity with the implicit knowledge bias of this skill base? The implicit knowledge bias is something that catches people a lot out in flexibility training and all training that we kind of do, where we kind of forget it sometimes. But people say they come from, the simple example is squatting. If I say to someone, I want you to, someone goes, I've been training for a long time. You go, okay, this guy's been training weights a long time. And I go, okay, fine. I want you to go do 5x5 squatting. There's a huge amount of implicit knowledge there that they will imply, go, oh, he wants me to squat. I will use a squat rack or squat stance. I know which shoes to wear. I know how to put weight on the bar. I know which bar to select and not use the aluminium one, but to use the 20 kg one. I know how to use chalk on my hands if I need it. I understand the technique and the loading thing. Now, I'm not saying everyone understands this, but I understand, that space around the gym has to be clear. The safety bars have to be set at the right height. I can adjust the safety bars on the rack if they're not set at the right height. I know I need to be facing a right direction because otherwise I'll be distracted by doing the lift. All these kind of things that are implicit in just saying go squat, but we don't have that in terms of flexibility. It's like go do splits. This is, go stretch hamstrings. Well, what sort of hamstring? What surface? What does the effect of having your heel on soft ground versus hard ground imply? How can we change this? Is this right for one person, wrong for the other? These kind of ideas are like, where is this person in relation to their skill, both in like how much can they actually just bring to the table in terms of the actual performance aspects, the coordinative aspects and all this, and as well as like, do they actually know like all the surrounding environment of that, what that skill takes place in, and do they know how to tweak things for themselves?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is quite obviously like already, not quite a lot of information for someone to even think about all the specifics and details and components that are needed to go about their training program. And this is also too why like, inherently, I think with regards to like, even among all the information that you're giving out, there's still the actual interpretation of all the information is really dependent on the individual and where they're like, even where they're coming from. Right.
Yeah.
And so when I think about, let's say inherently like systems in of themselves, like why are they not inherently a great way of going about training or dealing with clients? So an easy example would be like, you take something like, for example, like just FRC, right? Or something along those lines, something that's like, you basically have a very specific like protocol that you follow for almost every single person. And it almost seems like a lot of certification programs, not just that one, but whatever is out there, basically they just kind of create robots, right? Of people that have just like, they know the system and they just follow it, but they don't actually know how to implement it on a very high level or on a very individualized level. Can you
Yeah.
speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think this is a problem with the fitness industry in general, not just these systems, is that it's kind of, we place value on certification and other kind of things where it's like you can go and do a weekend cert and then you can basically pretend to be this kind of coach. I remember the first, like I have loads of these certs that I used to do when I was a personal trainer. I was like, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, the was working would pay for them, so I just have like, fucking stacks. I don't even remember what I have, but it's just kind of, I remember seeing one that really it was the eye opener one for me where I've done a bit of martial arts, like I'm doing a lot more now, but back in the day I'd done a bit. And I could go for a weekend cert and become a kickboxing instructor. And not just like a boxercise instructor. You'd be like, it was pitched that like you will become a level 3 kickboxing instructor with fight prep and everything in
Yeah.
a weekend for $150 in London. And I was just like I'd done some kickboxing at this stage, not a lot. And I was just like, well, I've done all my classes and I've trained with these guys, and there's a couple of guys in the gym I trained with a bit, and it's like you can learn nothing in 2 days in kickboxing, like literally nothing. Yet you could get qualified in this.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with all these kind of things. Like we can pick on FRC, but they're just playing the game, basically. They're playing the game of the fitness industry, where it's basically I can give you this, and then you can now pretend to be a physiotherapist. You can do a 2-day massage thing, and then you can pretend to be a massage therapist, and you can get insured for it, which is fine. But you can't learn anything in 2 days. I'm sorry. Like you can pick up ideas and concepts, but to really understand the subject, it
Yeah.
takes a long time. It takes information. It takes context of that information. And then it takes application, observation, and it's like say, I could teach you an exercise right now. You're pretty good. You know what you're doing. I've seen your Instagram. It's still going to take you about 100 times of trying that with 100 different clients to really, really hone in on the details of that exercise. And this is what happens with these systematized systems. It's like someone comes in, they present this issue, do this. There's no context for the issue. There's no other stuff. It's like, once again, who are we talking to? Are we talking to the 17-year-old who sprained his foot playing soccer? Are we talking to the 43-year-old who sprained his foot going up the stairs carrying his kid?
Yeah.
Very different contexts, very different outcomes, very different like surrounding emotional intents around these. To apply the same protocol, maybe it will work, maybe it won't. This is, we know this from pain science. We know like the context and the environment and people's perceptions of it is massive towards the healing process and the pain process. So just to say like there is a driver for everything that goes on for this person, and to say like, okay, we have a system, the system works and it's infallible. It's not. Systems are infallible because systems interact with other systems.
Yeah.
If you have someone whose other system of training is cycling endurance training, and they put in 250 miles a week on a bike, and then you give them the same protocol that someone who squats 3 times a week, 5 by 5, it's not the same system interacting with the system. And where systems interact is where we get interesting things happening. We either get synergism or the reverse.
Yeah. And so, when you think about the way people think about training, like whether it be with strength or even flexibility, or just generally, like you see a lot in the fitness industry with this concept of survival training, right? We see like in F45 and CrossFit and other boot camp kind of disciplines.
Yeah.
What is inherently wrong with the idea of like you just have to train harder? Like there seems to be this kind of concept where you just got to do more, or you got to go more intense, or you just gotta like blow your back out before you can make improvements. And it seems quite on kind of the extreme side of things, no?
Yeah, I think like we can let's just go a bit deeper on this actually, because I'm kind of bored of ripping on CrossFit and other stuff. So if we look at the fitness industry as general, and we even go back to the early days of the fitness industry and how it started, it is inherently infused with Judeo-Christian values. If we listen to all the words they use, suffering. Oh, well, what have we got on a cross? We have a suffering God. What do people use as the image of God themselves? So God is suffering. Your reward will come later if you work hard enough. What does this sound like? Protestantism. All of this kind of stuff is infused in. If we look at America as well, it still has this incredible Protestant, rebellious ethic to it. It's like, you will get your reward if you work harder. If you didn't get your reward, you did not work hard enough. And you see this in all these systems. It is a form of punishment. It is a form of almost catharsis or confession. It's like, I have eaten bad food and I have lived a bad life, but now I have found the system, whatever it is. And now by doing this and flagellating myself with this, I will reach some kind of epiphany. And this is really what's going on a much deeper level of this. It's not just the systems. The systems are just a byproduct of the environment they exist in and the people who created them. So you can see it. It's like, look at, I restrict. It's all about restriction. I restrict and I apply. I discipline myself with hard stuff because I am weak somewhere else. It's all value-led statements coming out as a fitness system. You can see this even say with Ido's training. What is one of Ido's biggest value statements? Freedom. It's not freedom of movement, it's freedom. Do you want freedom? Yeah. This is what movement training promotes people. Why do people get so is like, I want to be free? Why do you see the same kind of personality types grouping in different things? Because they go for the value judgments of that system that appeals to them or that they put value on.
So when you think about something, like Ido Portal and the current state of like the movement culture, where do you kind of see it right now, globally, and or even in just your neck of the woods, but also too, like, where do you see this kind of movement culture heading towards?
Yeah, that's a kind of what I've been thinking about a bit, or last year anyway, but it's kind of interesting just to observe it, because I wouldn't say, I was kind of one of the early kind of adopters of the idea, or it was just kind of sought out, so it's kind of interesting. But then it's basically the consumptive aspect of the fitness industry is kicked in. So now even in Dublin, I can find weekend CPD certs in movement coaching. You can become just generic, not even like a brand one like Animal Flow or Edo or anything like this. It's just like you can become a movement coach for a weekend for $150 and 12-point CPD. So this is the problem with the fitness industry. It is inherently consumptive in nature. It sees something and then someone goes, I'm going to repackage this. And they don't really know what they're doing, because most people kind of can be a bit undereducated maybe, I suppose, and or under contextized, or not even performance system. They just see it and they go, oh, let's make this. It's like, it's like you can do a 200-hour yoga cert, or you could do a weekend yoga cert. One of them is going to be inherently better than the other. Yeah. So we're in this idea where a lot of people are doing movement and teaching movement, but they just see movement as a very subset of disciplines. What does that mean? Oh, I'm crawling on the floor doing animal locomotion. and doing a bit of ring training.
Yeah.
That's really not movement, and it's like it's never really been Ito's message as well. It's just some stuff that he got, that he was quite good at, and then people will go, "Oh, Ito is very good at these kind of things. He's
Mm.
obviously good at other stuff." So then they go, "These are the things that kind of made movement it," and now this is movement. It's not like the whole giant movement spectrum of potentiality,
Yeah.
or it becomes like a subset of activities you have to do. So we can think like what was in vogue last year was the ball punching thing against the wall. It's like, oh, I'm doing boxing training. I'm just like, well, it's object manipulation. It's fun. It's the thing isn't inherently bad, but just to you're taking one thing out of the whole context and the whole system of boxing where this kind of skill belongs,
Yeah.
and then going, oh, this is gonna help my boxing, or this is gonna help, and you're just like, well, you don't even do boxing, so why do you care about it?
It is kind of funny that, like, yeah, people will start taking like very specific drills or very specific things out of the context of why people use it, and then
Yeah.
they just gain that skill, right? So they just like become very good at like bouncing the ball off the wall, but then they have nothing to like go like apply it to. So beyond like the idea of movement, right? So if we look at like flexibility and mobility, how would you kind of characterize these terms and what is commonly understood by them? And then how would you, present them from your own understanding?
So it's kind of like there's two contexts to these terms. There is the straight up scientific definition of these terms, or how they would be applied actually in the textbooks. And then there is the general conception of the terms. Now, some people would say we're arguing semantics and other stuff, but we have to give them a thing. Flexibility can basically be defined as your range of motion displayed under 6 categories. So we could have passive, active, static active, dynamic, partner, these ones, they're all in Thomas Kerr's book. I'd actually, going to the pain tolerance level, I'd add 2 more categories to this as dynamic and passive stretching, going to the psychological trauma level, which is, we see that in gymnastics and other kind of disciplines where people are pushed well beyond their consent levels, but they're kids, and we have it's a whole other different level ball game to get into. But so we have like 8 categories of flexibility. This is just total range of motion. It can apply either static or active or passive or dynamic. What we then begin to think about is mobility. Well, what is the actual, where does the term mobility come from is actually kind of interesting. It's mainly an occupational therapy term, and it generally relates in the sort of like the chronic usage is more like how can a person move around their environment
Mm.
and how can they do it. Now, it normally applies to like mobility and mobility aids and mobility scooters. So we're generally, because the people who are dealing with occupational therapists are generally people who've come out of either surgery or an old age or have some kind of physical limitation, and they need some kind of adaptation to their environment to go. So it's like, how can we increase this person's mobility? Well, we can take this idea generally and apply it and go like, what is mobility? Mobility is the ability for me to move around your environment freely, with ease, and with the ability to express. So that's how I would define it. It's not a set of drills, it's not a set of techniques, it's a concept. And the concept would then look at how we would look at our other main physical capacities of flexibility, strength, coordination, and endurance. And these would kind of fuse together to actually give a mobility picture of a person. We also have to think that mobility itself in this kind of concept is very specific.
Mm.
Like how mobile someone is compared to another is very, very different. I have like one aerialist friend, a friend of mine, Emily Avine. It was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in my life. She managed to climb about 3 meters up a rope without using her hands. Now, this is going up, and this is kind of like, as I described, as a friend of mine who was also there or seen it, was like, we describe it as Anaconda Strength. She was able to use her body like an anaconda like thing to go up a rope. Now, everyone else can go try that and figure out how she'd done it. No hands were involved. They're completely like just moving around to control with the waist. Whereas if I was to ask her to, I don't know, display your mobility in a game of a laser tag, she'd probably get wrecked. Maybe not. She's pretty good, but it's just to give it. There is a context to where your mobility appears, and like also if we think about the environment that appears as well, so we can look at like qualitative aspects like we do in strength and conditioning. It's like, okay, I can make this person stronger. We can measure that. I can make this person's VO2 bigger. We can measure that. I can make this person's flexibility bigger. We can measure this. I could have a measured system of mobility drills,
Yeah.
but is that person going to be able to do really nice dynamic Cossack squat changes while going under a fence while I'm throwing a ball at their face? And if that ball has a spike and is on fire, are they going to be able to perform just as well? So it's kind of, we have to think that there is an environment and a context for things to take place in.
Yeah. I think, yeah, it is something, and it kind of goes back to what you were talking about with regards to, what does a person, actually want with regards to their training, their goals. I would probably venture to guess that most people are probably coming at you with relatively superficial kind of goals, or goals that have been kind of expressed upon them as opposed to what they actually want to achieve. And so, and this is where we can talk, even expanding into like how important like environment, culture, limiting beliefs, your prior experiences and perspectives, like massively affect how you progress in your fitness journey and like what you want to accomplish. Can you talk about a little bit about how like those like limiting beliefs and like what people's perspective of like just flexibility as a whole can actually greatly affect their capacity to progress and grow in that particular realm?
Yeah, it's definitely, this is one of the things we deal with a lot. I'm sure you've dealt with it as well. Is like someone comes like they're 35, 40,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, I've never been flexible and I'm not flexible and my mum's not flexible and my dad has tight calves and I'm just not flexible. And it's like, well, you're telling yourself a story of why you're not flexible. Whereas, I have a process, you have a process. Anyone who's a good coach has a kind of process and a journey and a training thing that will bring someone through. And it's kind of, people just don't get it, or they don't understand. It's like, yes, you spent 40 years not doing this. Of course you're not. It's just like I've spent 40 years not playing darts. I'm probably terrible at darts, but I'm sure I could get good at it if I practiced it. And it's one of the things, like flexibility, like everything else, is a skill. There is a coordinative aspect to it. You have to practice the skill of being flexible. As you become flexible, then you become more skillful at it, and then you don't need to do it. It's like kind of say the pro athlete. You take someone who's a pro athlete and they quit for 10 years. You go, I don't know, a golfer or whatever, and then you go, all right, no, the best ones I've been seeing lots of lately is old boxers, dudes who are like in their 50s and 60s, and they go, oh, I'm going to take up boxing, even at amateur level. And they're suddenly like, they're back into sport, they get a bit of fitness up, and they're hitting harder than the guys who are 20, 22.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, yeah, they spent like 30 years doing boxing beforehand, and they're very fucking good at it. So the skill comes back. They may not have like the cardio, but that will come back a bit, as much for a 50-year-old. So it's this kind of idea of like the limiting belief is just a limitation from non-experience. A lot of times, like people have not done the training, so they haven't earned the reward, so they haven't got it, and that's okay. Generally, it's kind of, I don't know, I suppose I just have a lot of confidence in my methods, and that goes into people's training. It's also like I explain it to people. There's an expectation of results. It takes time. We have to just try it out. We have to see what works for you, and we have to find what works for you. So I always try to have this idea of co-creation in programs and other stuff. So if you get the person involved in their own progress, they'll be more invested and they'll have more confidence that it's working. Or if it stops working, that we'll be able to troubleshoot it. And it's one of these things that I try to do as much as I can. Not every client wants this kind of thing, but I don't want to be the coach to be like, I am the coach and I know everything. It's like, at the end of the day, it's your body. You need to start assuming responsibility, and this kind of thing, like using me like a consultant. So this is what you're dealing with a lot with limitation beliefs. It's just like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. Fine, we can teach you. I can't do it. Okay, we're going to make you. That's fine. It's also just trying to have something that shows people. I can remember one thing in particular was I was teaching a seminar somewhere, and we had this slightly older guy come in, maybe 40, mid 40s, wasn't in great shape, whatever. And he's like, oh, I've never been flexible in my life, and I've done yoga, and it didn't really work, and, I'm just not a flexible type. We were just working through the seminar. I just, I keep an eye on the people who come to the seminar, just make sure everyone's having a good time, and, get to know them and what they're looking to train and other stuff. And I just spotted this guy. We were doing some drills, we'd done some stuff, and he was displaying a gravity and weight assisted pancake position that was very good. So this is a standing pancake using weight, using gravity and weight to drive the position, as well as using one of the specific hip flexor techniques. We'd layered a couple of stretches in. blah, doesn't matter. And I was like, I just took a photo on my phone of his pancake
Mm.
in this position, and I flipped it 90 degrees. And I just go like, look at this. This is your pancake if we can just get all the active flexibility up to standard. And it would have been like a pancake where you would have been leaning probably about 30 degrees off the ground. So pretty good, like by most people's standard. Obviously needs like a bit of work and blah, but you're just going like, well, if you can display this in gravity, you're saying you're not flexible. And this, like when we look at it, is a very good pancake. It would basically be like a yoga block away from your head to the floor.
Mm.
You know, you are flexible, it's in there. We just have to find a way of getting it out in the conditions you want.
Yeah.
And this was like, I remember seeing his face. It was like kind of, because, you know, when you come to one of these seminars, you know, like everyone's super flexible and super into it and is a coach or has a lot of experience. And then you get people who are kind of new to the game or they know you from online. They go, oh, let's go this. And they're like, they get a bit intimidated. And he had a look at someone who's just like, oh, I'm in the wrong room. And from that moment onwards, he was just like, oh, it just, you could see it go on, like the limitation was gone.
Mm.
So this is kind of thing of just being able to point out these moments or these moments, small moments of success. So like this was a pretty big one, but this was like, oh, your limitation belief, you are flexible. We just need to figure out how to get it out.
Yeah. And it is quite interesting when you think about, and this is one thing that I really quite like about the idea or the how we kind of train with regards to like using just body weight and all these other factors that kind of play, or tools that kind of play into how we train athletes and train members, is like the example you gave where we play around so much with just the positioning of the body relative to, I mean, one thing you kind of pointed out, which I'm really happy you did, is like how people don't really think of the concept of using gravity as a tool or in their training. But how you can manipulate the positioning, make it almost appear to that individual that it's an easier movement, but it can actually be an more difficult task. And so when you think of, and a good example what I always see is like, you know, you see like a yogi that's able to do a press handstand, but can't do like a straight line handstand, or something along those lines, where they're like, they seem to kind of do things that are, and so they'll have the same idea that, you know, oh, I can't get in a straight line, or I can't, they'll say the same things, right? Just about a different skill. So when you think about, you know, like the way that you've gone about your training methodology, and, you know, now you have your M3 program, you know, how does your program or what you teach and what you do differ from other training programs that are out there? And then how has that changed from when you kind of first entered the fitness industry?
It's a big question. I suppose how it changed was, from the first, probably easy way to go, is like we had to look at the bigger, this is the thing what kind of got me was, I suppose I'll probably explain this other places, but I'll explain it here. Is like when I was in circuit school, I was flexible for the normal kind of population group. I had splits, my bridge was pretty good, all this. In the circus terms, it wasn't great. It was not like bottom of the thing. I was like at top of the rung in terms of strength and other stuff, but like bottom of the rung when you compare it to like aerialists who come in and like doing a meter high oversplit like cold in the morning, like, you know. So it was always kind of a point for me, is like, why can I get myself strong but I can't get flexible? And I would ask people going, oh, you know, how do I get more flexible? What do I work on? And you'd get the same kind of a list of stretches. You have to hold this one, and you have to stretch more, and you have to stretch twice a day, and you have to do this stretch, and then you stretch the hamstrings with these 5 stretches, and then you blah. And, you know, it didn't work. And most of the time it actually made me regress in flexibility because it was just too much. And so I kind of got sick. And so I kind of took on the role of like anthropologist, and I'd observe people. I'd be like, well, this person is saying they do all these stretches, but then if we look at what they're doing in the area, in their aerial equipment, oh, well, this is a split that's gravity assisted. This one's gravity resisted. This one is expressed in 2 planes of movement. This is expressed in 3 planes of movement. This one enters and exits in this one. They use velocity. They use displacement. They use all these kind of different ideas of flexibility. They do it without thinking about it. They do it with thinking about it. They do it with a focus on alignment. They do it with a focus on tasking. So suddenly I was like, okay, well, this gives me a hint. Then I started looking everywhere. I'd ask dancers, I'd ask martial artists, and what do you do? And you basically get the same one. Like most of them had very bad stretching practices, which would just be relaxed stretching towards the end of a session, or kind of go in and, you know, sit in the phone and do this message and do splits and then move around. But then when I would look at what was happening in these sessions, we have, say, contemporary dance, we have someone who is expressing their range of motion with the intent of expressing certain alignments, certain moods, certain qualities. The flexibility is a container. They're using it on the floor. They're using it with different contact points. They are using it standing up. They are using it traversing space. They're using it statically. They are using it in dynamic jumping manner. So you have this big context of what the flexibility is appearing in. And what you realize is what they say they're doing to get flexible is not what is actually making them flexible. It is 10% of it at most. The 90% is actually coming from all the usage of the discipline. So what I basically done for the M3 was stripped out as much as I could the environmental context of all these disciplines that express a high degree of flexibility, understood how to layer them and how to actually start introducing them to people in a systematized way. Then once we have that, we have a bigger picture of flexibility techniques to draw on, and we can actually use as an assessment system. We can go, oh, someone, the very basic thing, we have the idea of 3 planes of gravity. We can have gravity is assistive, gravity is neutral, or gravity is resistive. If someone is using a pike stretch, the pike stretch is the easiest way to understand it. It gets a bit more complicated in things like bridge. So a pike, I'm doing a standing toe touch. Okay, we have the vector of gravity is pulling me down, give or take. There's a bit of rotation, but it's giving me a traction force in that direction. Then a seated pike, gravity is at 90 degrees of my lengthening direction. I'm lengthening towards my toes, and I need to find a way to actually use the musculature to actually anteriorly tilt the hip and get me going in this direction. How do I lengthen out the spine in this? Hanging leg raise. I'm bringing my legs up to the bar. It's basically the same 3 positions flipped 90 degrees each time. So how do I get these positions, and what is the railroad? So it's like, oh, I need my hanging leg raise to improve, and but I can do a standing Jefferson curl with 50 kg to my elbows. You're like, well, what can you do on the seated one? Okay, we need a range of techniques from the seated one that will bridge the gap and allow you to express the same amount of flexibility you're doing with a 50 kg Jefferson curl in a seated position. Then when you go to the hanging one, then you'll actually have a kind of, if we think we're just slowly increasing the resistance here, then we'll be able to actually express the stress in the stretch position in the manner we want and try and replicate it as close as possible. So by going through the planes and having different techniques and different stages of them, we can then actually have a very basic assessment system of how we can find roadmaps and how we can find techniques and ideas and vectors to work from to actually get this person more flexible, or if they are flexible, how they can actually express their flexibility in an active manner or an open chain manner. So this is one way. And also, like, say if we go, someone can do the classic one lately, someone can do a Jefferson curl with their toes to their elbows and they've got 50, 60 kg, but you take the weight off them, they can barely touch the floor. It's like, well, how do we get this person from using 50 kg of assistance, so they're basically using 50 kg and gravity, so what I'd call an end range closing technique, vector assisted and weight assisted, so the vector is increased by using the weight. So the weight is basically, if we think of just the rough thing, the abs, the hip flexors, the quads, everything on the front side of the body, anterior surfaces, is basically being assisted by 50 kg to express that range of motion. How do we make them output 50 kg more of strength? How do we understand, can we give the body the experience of control in that position, that they can get into and out of the position without the weight, or with the weight as a guide, so that they don't need the weight to express the position?
Yeah, it is, and I think the way that you talk about using tools, you know, with regards to the process is very different than what is typically seen with regards to like just the general fitness industry, right? Because like most things, let's say weight in general, is almost purely used in a restrictive manner. It's just there it's some just external force being applied onto the body that we need to move. And so I think like having the capacity to use the tools in slightly different ways requires a different way of thinking about those tools. Can you think of maybe an example with regards to like, let's say using bands, or using like, let's say, even going back to Jefferson curls, you know, how would you use weight to be assistive in getting greater range of movement in your Jefferson curls in an active capacity versus like letting essentially letting the external weight do the movement for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I get you. Man. Yeah, so it comes down to intent. This is the thing. Weight is just weight. Weight with a direction is just a vector. So once you understand just vector idea, then it doesn't really matter if we're talking about weight bands. We're just talking about a direction. What we are using when we have a vector is we have something applied to the body that's making it go this way. And at a very simple level, I have two ideas with any kind of movement or any kind of force applied to the body. I can go with or I can go against. And we can just think, contact improv. I can go against someone, I can push the thing, or I can go with and I can follow their movement. Very simple. We can do the same thing in the weight. It's like, oh, this weight is pulling me down. Now, what muscles in my body can I contract that will, if we think of the shortening and the closing size of the joint or this closing angle, what can I do here to basically assist this weight? So we're not using the weight to assist us, we're assisting the weight to go further. So if we take the idea of what I call tasking, is as much as we can in every single position, if possible, we want to introduce an idea of a task, either a tactile task, a visual task, or some other kind of positioning task. So I might go say my Jefferson curl, it pulls me down, I reach the soft stop. Soft stop is the point where like the tension balances out for a moment. You might go a bit deeper. At the soft stop, I will not just go deeper, I will intend to push the weight deeper, and I'll use something, generally a piece of hair on my arm or a bit of my tattoo. And I'll go, oh, I can touch this leaf on the tattoo. Okay, can I touch 1 centimeter higher? Can I touch 5 millimeters higher by pushing down? If I was to say, like, the person, scan your body and use your abs, your hip flexors, your short adductors, whatever, every muscle involved in hip flexion to push yourself deeper, they probably wouldn't be able to do it because it takes a very large amount of bodily interoception, basically. Whereas if we give them a task, the body is smarter than you and it will figure out the chain it needs to turn on to achieve the task. I call this the TV remote effect. So everyone's sitting down, you're watching a movie, your TV remote or your phone or whatever is off to the side, and you have some popcorn on your chest. You don't want to move. You're sitting there, shit, my bowl of popcorn's going to spill, I'm feeling lazy. You reach out the arm, you reach for it, and you don't get your phone. And then you just go, oh. And then suddenly something happens in your body, and your arm just gets longer and just gets the phone, or it's the I've lost my keys under the fridge effect. And then you get it. And then you don't even notice that your arm just like suddenly grew 5 centimeters longer and you got your thing. And, it's really whatever, lateral displacement, scapula, whatever. But we don't even think about what the movement is. It just happened. Because we had the task and the body tried it once, kind of set up a set of conditions, pass, fail, failed, tried something else. Body's smarter than you, it sees the task, it will do it. It's same thing happens in flexibility. It's like, can I have a task? Can I hijack this body's mechanism and use it for flexibility training? If I put too much weight into the system, it's going to want to restore, or it's going to be resistant, or there's too much tension. So we need to find the right balance of weight. It's one of these things, it's like we have strength training, which could be taught as dynamic flexibility training in some regards, but we generally are working within a range of motion we can already do. Once you can do a range of motion, it's just strength training. It's just sets and reps and layering up, increasing volume and intensity over a time period. What we're trying to get the body to do with a lot of flexibility training is do something it hasn't done for a very long time. We have to give it a stimulus that is digestible, that we're enhancing the feeling of control. The simplest way to think of control in a flexibility position is, can I get in and out of this position under control, under my own volition, in 3 planes of movement, in 3 plane relationships to gravity? So what assistance can I give this? It's like someone with a chin-up. Someone who can't do a chin-up, we're doing assisted spotted chin-ups.
Yeah.
We're like, we get to a point and they'll drop, or they won't be able to pull themselves up, or they'll be able to pull themselves up under 90 degrees of bend here, and anything below that they lose. So it's like, well, we can give them the minimum amount of assistance to achieve this thing. We're not like wrecking them. We're not trying to force them in and out of the position. If you think of assisted chin-up, if I just lift someone up and down, they're not going to get stronger. They're not going to get with it. Whereas if I give them enough weight and then I'm trying to make them come under muscular control or nervous system control, then they'll begin to get stronger.
Yeah.
It's why bands don't really work too well for chin-ups.
Yeah, and I think it's, with regards to how does a person, an individual, control the assistance, right, to not get over assisted in their movement, because I feel like that tends to happen quite a lot where, again, like banded chin-ups where someone is using a band and they're essentially maxing out the assistance that that band is possibly able to give them. And then their body is obviously going to be very smart and only provide enough energy or capacity to be able to perform the movement. And so then you don't see them being or having the capacity to decrease the resistance of the band because they're just so dependent on it as an external tool.
Yeah. It's once again, yeah, that kind of the band chin up thing. It just comes back to the task. The person gets very good at doing the task. When you get good at doing the task, you get more efficient at it. If you get more efficient, you use less energy. It's like, oh, I get really efficient at using the bands.
Yeah. I'm great at band pull-ups.
Yeah.
So, obviously, something that happens quite often, right, is that someone will hear something that you say, they'll take it slightly out of context, and they will kind of like push the idea to the extreme almost. So when we're thinking about this idea of tasking, right?
Yeah.
How can it be used? Because sometimes, there are some movements where generally, if you apply enough intensity on the body or enough weight on the body or some external load or whatnot, the body will inherently find its way to perform the task that it needs to the most efficient way that it knows how. But to some extent it's compensating in a lot of ways to achieve this task as well. So I'm guessing there has to be some kind of balance between kind of this, like the arbitrarily, like just perform some kind of random task versus like, okay, what is the actual like technique component that needs to be worked on, right?
Yeah. So this comes down to the performance of the skills and understanding what you're trying to do. So if we think of the task, like I say, okay, Pike, I want you to touch deeper. That simplifies the whole thing when it's like, oh, I actually want you to perform the skill with locked knees, with the weight slightly shifted backwards on your heels. I want you to be standing on a box this high with your toes not hanging over it. And this, once again, implicit knowledge that people kind of forget about. There's like this idea, and this is the task takes place with a set of constraints. It's not just like touch deeper. If it was touch deeper, you just do a squat. It's keep the legs locked and perform the best quality pike you can while going forward. So this is one of the things that people, asking. You do have to swallow it. Like it can be a double-edged sword if people don't really understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you still have to. Well, just comes to educating people and just explaining clearly. It's also like it is this thing like when people are new to these, like for me and you, I say, okay, let's do a 4-12. Okay, we lock our knees, or you go lock knees or unlock knees. We'll ask and you go, well, what exactly is your expectation as a coach of this? Yeah. Well, do the people even know there's a difference? Okay, we have to educate them. Have we explained the exercise clearly? Can they coordinate our explanation and demonstration into their body? This is very important as well.
And so when you think about like flexibility as I guess flexibility is in its part in the fitness industry, where do you kind of see most of the energy kind of going towards, and where do you feel like maybe there's some disconnect with? I mean, let's even think about the differences between like flexibility from a theory perspective versus like a practical application perspective, and then also too, even how do you go about working on like the psychological component of flexibility training?
Few questions in there, but no problem. So first off, like as the fitness industry and the industry itself it's getting more tuned in. It's like if you look at our three main physical capacities: strength, endurance, and flexibility, range of motion. We are very good at strength training. We know a lot of papers have been published, a lot of stuff has been verified. People have been tinkering it for a long time and have found stuff that works, and it's now been verified that it does work. So we're very good. We can kind of assess you quite clearly. We go, you are a male aged 24, you have done soccer for blah blah blah. Okay, we will test you, we will set some baselines, and we'll try and raise your standards, and these are the kind of things we need to pay importance for your sport. Same with endurance. We're very good at endurance. Endurance is basically maths nowadays. We can just go, you are an XYZ mate, you're a female age 27, you want to run an ultra marathon, you have only run marathons before, your heart rate is this, your VO2 max is this. Okay, and you want to run on this altitude. Well, we are going to have a GPS sports watch that will track you and measure all this, and we'll look at how you're performing. We can basically just put it into a spreadsheet and output a very effective training plan. There's bits of differences, and there's obviously a bit of technique, and we have to teach running technique, but just in terms of the pure physical capacity of endurance, we're very good at it. Flexibility, we're at the tinkerer stage, where what happens is people are tinkering with it and trying to find what works. We can use the stuff in the research we can use as guidance, but the research is very poor. The research is not great. The research is very questionable. It's also done by a lot of people who aren't flexible or have never been flexible, and it's not really operating on the same level. It's like, I have whatever 20 or 30 people I put in side splits this year in total, and all these kind of things. Like, well, we have people that have gone from like not touching their toes to the highest levels of flexibility, and the results and the stuff we have to use is not what the research says we should use, or the context. So there is context, and it's beginning to get better, and it's beginning to get more stuff, and people are criticizing the research, which is good, but we're still at this kind of final frontier of athletic performance. It's like, oh, can we improve? It's like what you ask any old athlete. Like every old athlete I've ever spoken to, it's like, what did you think you should have paid more attention to? Oh, I should have done more stretching.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, it's really strong, or it's really fast, or it's good at soccer, or good at GA, or like hurley, or whatever the Irish local sports. Like, wish I'd done more stretching. Is basically the thing. I've never encountered anyone who said they wish they'd done more running or wish they'd done more strength training.
Yeah, it is quite interesting that of those three, right, that flexibility is kind of fallen back so far in the studies and in the research, and one of the big things that I kind of see as like a big difference between like strength and endurance training versus like flexibility training is that it's a completely different kind of like mindset like involved in the process. You think of like endurance, you think of someone like David Goggins, who's like putting out a lot of really good content for people with regards to basically just man up and go. You have strength training where you have like a lot of power lifters and such who are also kind of like, it's really much about just like brute strength and kind of a certain kind of mindset. Why do you think that flexibility has been something that's kind of been neglected for so long?
It's one of these ones, I think, because one, the results are not directly measurable in the short term. This is one of the things. Is like, well, let's just say we have an athlete who has perfectly adequate flexibility needs for their sport. They have no limitations in range of motion. Everything is fine. But they carry a high level of body tension. One of the most effective tools for getting rid of body tension we know is just relaxed static stretching. You can clear body tension basically faster than anything else, and it has lasting results. But we can't measure that, and we don't know how to coach it. So we want this person just to do a stretching routine. How do we assess this person? Do we give them the right stretches? Can we teach them to relax? This is one of the key determinants on like being able to express strength very quickly, or in an athletic thing, is how fast can your muscles relax? This is the other side of it. How fast can they tense? How fast can they shorten? How fast can they lengthen? Very simple. If they're shortened and they hold the shortening at the end, it's like, well, they're still saying tense, wastes energy. It's the same kind of thing. It's like, well, if we could give them but how do we know our intervention is being effective? It's not, because most of the time, if we look at a generic strength and conditioning program, it's getting better, but a lot of times it's like, oh, you will have like, you're going to work on squats over a 10-week period, and you're going to escalate the volume at this percentage, and you're going to work in 75%, and you're going to work all the way up to 85%. You're going to do X number of reps, and you're going to blah, 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 and your form has to be tight.
Yeah.
Endurance training, same. You're in season or you're off season, we're going to work on your endurance, on your 5-meter sprinting capacity, and we're going to do this, and we're going to measure the speed, and we're going to measure how fast you can keep your 5-meter endurance, or your 5-meter endurance. What's the term for anaerobic endurance? Blah. So that, whereas like we can't really measure, then the programs I get is like, okay, and go stretch your hamstrings and do a single leg forward fold. And it's like, well, if we look at, it comes back to this implicit knowledge. If we look at how tightly that squat is done, or that the L sprint dash drill, where you go sprint, turn, dash, back. These are tightly taught, and the coaches are like technicians at this kind of thing. I think of like bench press is more technical than a snatch nowadays in terms of everything someone wants you to do. But stretching, people don't have the technical expertise to actually implement it in a way that goes, oh, well, we tell the athletes to all do the same stretch. Let's face it, they mightn't have the same capacity in that stretch, or they mightn't have the same experience of that stretch. So one of them, it's suffering, the other one's enjoying it. And it's like, well, How can we make the one suffering enjoy it? How can we get that resistive retraction going on? And this is just with like our basic kind of stretching methodologies. Whereas if we look at the other stuff, it's like, well, we have all our our isometric usage, our dynamic stretching drills, but where do they fit in the context of a strength and conditioning program? Like if I have someone doing side split isometrics, if they're doing like heavy, they're going progressively deeper on this, well, we have a big eccentric loading. Something has to give in the strength and conditioning program. There has to be synergism between the programs. There has to be thing, whereas things are generally seen as separate. It's like the strength is separate and the flexibility is separate.
Yeah.
They actually interact, and this is something you have to watch out for. So
yeah, and like to go off what you're talking about, like how and where would they inherently like intersect? And I do find that when you talked a little bit about how like all the circus athletes were obviously they're doing their like flexibility kind of program or whatever they were doing, but that their kind of like everyday actions were very much had a greater like they're a greater part of their overall like gains in overall flexibility and their ability to demonstrate strength at those end ranges. I mean, I find that with regards to like strength training, it tends to happen that there's a lot of training kind of in that mid-range area where, if actually people just kind of they could even work on the same exact movements, but had learned or worked on the capacity to be able to train the entire full like range of movement, that would actually help them with their flexibility as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely. There's kind of two things going on there. It's one, we have like, say if we just look at the research, we know mid-range training, it has our curve, our bell-shaped curve, and it will, if we raise the mid-range, we will raise the strength at the end ranges. This has been shown. We generally will know that if we train the end ranges, what's kind of interesting, and I have no definitive answers, like what actually happens when we raise the end ranges? Do we flatten the strength curve or do we raise the peak? This is something that's not been shown, or to my capacity, or as far as I know it. And so it's kind of like we have to go, what's going on here? It's also like we have to look at what we were doing on flexibility training. Are we doing end range training? Or are we training the person to go beyond their end range? These are two very different things. And if I'm training someone's end range, we're just thinking about partials. Oh, I'll do half squats from the knees fully flexed position. Boom, boom, boom. Good.
Yeah.
We know this will target certain things. But how do we actually get this person to get more flexible using a squat? Obviously, they can squat, but can we supercharge this process? And it comes down to sort of the shortening and the tasking. It's like, pull your, like, simple cues of pull yourself deeper. Feel more of your hip crease in contact with your thigh. This kind of idea. It's not really working. Well, can we get the hip flexors used to firing in this deep flex position? That will help pull. Can we do it in the tibialis anterior? Can we make the tibialis anterior pull ourselves deeper? So we actually have some kind of, I call them charge dynamics. So it's like a dynamic stretch that we're charging by pulling back in the manner of a bow and arrow. This will help output more flexibility from the strength movement we're looking at. So this is where you can get like, this is where you can turn a movement. This is where we get like the body is driving with assistance of the weight versus the weight is just forcing you down.
Yeah. And I think that's, something you said there just now is like quite interesting to bring up, is like the body's like capacity to activate specific muscles or be actively engaged in the process and throughout every part of that range of movement, right? Because even something even as simple as like doing squats, like you tend to see, like, for example, if someone's doing like negatives, maybe a safer movement to talk about would be like doing negatives on a pull-up, where you'll just inherently see like at some point their muscles just drop, right, from doing pull-ups, because they just lost the capacity to be engaged at any amount that allows them to perform the movement. So yeah, it's quite interesting that's a good thing that you brought up. And also too, like, even obviously a big part of your process is like helping people build greater awareness around their movement as well. Like, do you actually even know like what the hell your scapula is doing in this movement, or what are your joints doing in these movements? I think it's quite interesting, that whole process. Um,
Yeah.
so when you're thinking about incorporating other kinds of like training modalities, are there things that you've picked up from other arenas that you've kind of started incorporating into like your training and your programs?
I don't know. I'd say the whole system is kind of like a toolbox of concepts and things
Yeah.
drawn from other places. Is as I kind of said, I am the creator of the system, but I'm more probably the curator of the system at present. It's probably one way to think about it. So I'm trying to think of
Then
something interesting.
would you maybe say, or maybe you could talk about are there any like basic like foundational principles in which your kind of philosophy is based on?
Yeah, so if people want to check it out, to go onto the website modernmobility.com, we
Mhm.
have the 7 main principles of M3. So I could give you a quick overview of some of the ones we didn't touch on. Is I suppose gravity is a principle, tasking is a principle. Oh, let me just open my website so I can see which order I have them on it. It's always it's always good. I had an article on it. I don't want to like call them something else when I name these things. It's how formal my stuff is. I'm like, yeah, I should probably put it down,
Yeah.
or have it down, but I should probably translate it into set terms rather than just make them up as I go along. So yes, in the order, the correct order. So we have gravity and tasking. We've already kind of discussed them. We have seed positions. There is basically positions that turn into other positions. This is the idea. A seed turns into a tree. By having a set amount of these positions, we can actually use them to assess what needs to be done in these planes. And then we can look at actually, it's what we use to generate our exercises. It's kind of one of those things that's like, I haven't really released a lot about this because it's kind of the crown and the jewel of the system.
Yeah.
Yeah, the jewel in the crown in the system, not the crown in the jewel. It's the crown and the jewel in the jewel. But it is kind of like, well, if we understand a split is based on this seed position, the X seed, well, then by looking at the X seed, its fundamental expression, the smallest one, we can understand where all the isometric contractions go on,
Mhm.
all the planes of gravity, and how we can regress and progress someone through different limitations in their body. This is one of the key things, like, oh, so instead of having a set system of exercises, we can generate probably about 2,800 exercises using this system.
Mhm.
So this is kind of gives us our matrices of like possibilities and planes of gravity. Once we have planes of gravities, tasks, shortening or lengthening, using these positions, we can generate that. So it's like you have almost infinite potential. You can also use the seating idea to go. Someone comes to me from pole dance, goes, "I want to get better at a rainbow Marchenko." I can go, "Well, I don't know what the fuck a rainbow Marchenko is, but I know what it is now because I worked with pole dancers, but I didn't know what a rainbow Marchenko was." I can look at it, I can go, "Oh, this is this seat position.
Yeah.
Your limitation in your aesthetic you want to achieve is at this part of the seed. So we will work on that. This will then hopefully translate to it."
Mm.
Velocity. Velocity is one of the key things that people in all their stuff, or generally in most way people think about flexibility training, it's always slow and relaxed. It's
Mm.
like, breathe and relax and sink deeper and blah, blah, blah. But we have to have a way of like, if you train slow, you will be slow. So we have to have a way of introducing velocity as a kind of component of our training. We want people to be able to choose the speed they want and not have limitations on speed. It's like, oh, dynamic flexibility. Dynamic flexibility is certain radians of the joint closing angles. Okay, well, we need to find a way to introduce this one. It can be risky, maybe, maybe not. I can debate that with people, but it's still, we have to have a controlled way of getting faster. We have to have a way of not getting limitations. Even if we look at what happens on the muscle activity, it's quite interesting. It's like if we're moving kind of slow pace and everything, we have generally quite a degree of co-contraction going on at all present. When we're moving faster, we have a coordination between agonist and antagonist where they kind of pulse in offset manners with each other.
Yeah.
So I go really fast, I throw my arm really fast, and then the agonist fires, the antagonist fires briefly to stabilize, and then one of them fires again to put the braking action on. So it's this kind of pulsing mechanism we go on that we have to actually get used to training. It's a thing that can be trained separately. If we're training slow, we always have co-contraction, then we don't have ease of movement to a certain degree. Layering. It's understanding how all the different stretches interrelate and how you actually put them together. We have layering on a micro level, on just in a workout basis, like what exercise comes before the other one. This is very similar to people with strength training we do
Mm.
certain ones first, and then they'll have an effect on the ones we do next. So we're not going to train the shit out of our lower back and calves and knee extensors and then go do squats. Maybe you would, but then you go, okay, I'll be going into my squats fatigued. I'll drop my expectations, not try 1RM then. Same thing with flexibility is like, can we potentiate the effect of the main exercises by layering in other exercises? Once people have got the idea of layers, can they express the layers in the positions themselves? And then we also have the idea of like layering over a longer period of time. It's like, when do we introduce certain concepts into someone's program? How does this look over like a yearly kind of stack? Then simple. This is the thing. It's like the implementation of the exercises and the thing has to be simple. The nervous system high is very complicated. It's much more complicated than we can even imagine. We don't even know what it can do really. But can we get into it? It hides all its interfaces under. It hides under simple interfaces. This is where the tasking comes in. If I give the body something simple to do, like touch here, touch there, it will do it for me. Whereas if I try to go, okay, relax calves, relax hamstring, relax internal rotators, turn on this muscle, turn off that muscle, it's too complicated. I can't do it like everything all at once synchronized. But if I get the body to do it, oh, suddenly it gets better. And this is kind of the interface you want to use. And then our last principle is time. It just takes time to adapt. And it's one of the things I want to get into people. It's like, there is a short-term coordinative capacity increase in flexibility. When you start doing new exercises, you get better coordinating and doing them. After that, there's kind of a flat period where nothing happens, and then you get more results. And you have to give the body time. This is where people go. They jump around from program to program. They don't stick with something. They haven't programmed for consistency. So this is the kind of thing. It's like, we want people to be consistent. Once you train consistently, then you'll get the results. Then all your limitation beliefs will dissolve. Why? Because you've shown yourself, oh, consistently do something, it gets better.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those, what you're talking about, I mean, they all make sense, and they all kind of fit in with, I think, with everything that we've been talking about. I thought it was kind of a funny example with, and it's something that I do as well with like some of the athletes that I work with is when you're making a program or you're working on something specific to an individual and like what they want for their goals, like it's actually really important to kind of understand, like, if you don't understand like what the movement is, to actually understand like what it is they're actually trying to do. And I think that speaks kind of very highly of how you're able to, essentially what I think all good coaches should be able to do is like, can you look at someone's movement and be able to assess and break it down, even if you don't know what it is exactly the sport is, or what exactly they're supposed to be doing to like win the game or whatnot, right? It's like, can you just look at their movement, break it down, and train them in a capacity that allows them to gain greater performance? I think that's, that example you gave is great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So I think we're coming up close to the end here. I had a great chat. I really liked all the concepts and everything that we talked about. I'm sure we can go into a little bit more depth in any one particular area that we've discussed, but I hope that that people are being active in their learning process. Hopefully they took quite a few notes, and I think a big part of it, right, is that they're actually going to take some of these ideas and start implementing them into their actual practice, and doing other parts of the learning process instead of just sitting back and listening. Is there anything else that you would kind of want to leave the audience with? I mean, you said a lot already. So
yeah. It's one of those things, like we could just do another hour and just go.
Yeah, I know, right? Maybe we can do another one soon, on a different platform with regards to doing a podcast or something like that. So that would be really cool. I think that there would definitely be people, after listening to this and hearing your concepts and your principles and such, would probably want to maybe even reach out. And where would be like the best place to kind of find you?
So the two best places to find me is modernmobility.com. So that's the Modern Methods of Mobility main site. There's online training available there. When we film our programs next year, the programs will be available from it. And then handstandfactory.com as well, where we literally just updated the site. Well, by the time this is gone out, it's probably out for a month, but we just done that recently. So new site is there, and new programs coming soon, but all the old programs are pretty good as well. The old programs are kind of interesting if you've been listening to this and wondering on the application of it, because each program has a flexibility component in it. And it also, if you look at how I've layered it in, there's a flexibility program, or a set one in it for different levels. but I've also layered the flexibility concept we're doing into the handstand training itself. So it's not just a flexibility; everything works synergistically.
Yeah.
So even hit my own stuff. Even if you're listening to this, going like, I don't do handstands, but want to see how the concept applies to pancake, press, handstand, how planes of gravity work, and you went through and assisted. There's a lot of information to be gleaned there.
Yeah, I think that's quite, something else to think about as far as like audience members that are listening in, is that even though, there's maybe not even a particular skill that you're very much interested in, but if you're actually like truly looking at beyond just like the black and white of what the program is, and actually look at the underlying ideas of like what's trying to be expressed, I think you can gain a lot of information, even if, like the example you gave, if you're not interested in handstands, like I'm sure there's a lot of basic principles that can be gained and applied to other areas. So I think that's kind of where, as far as like people's education kind of goes too, they kind of almost like this idea of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? It's like, just like don't break down the kind of like the information that's given to them in a way that allows them to kind of maximize the parts that would benefit them the most.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's that kind of the idea. Like it's always good to look at a different sort of training, different discipline, whatever than you're used to. See how they train. Get into it. You don't have to go all in, but see how they train, how they actually train. See if you can explain their training in your terms, and then vice versa. See if you can explain your training in their terms.
Yeah,
that's kind of an interesting one.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome, man. Well, I very much appreciate your time. Look forward to further discussions and hopefully see you out in Bali soon. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So to everybody listening in, again, I hope you took away a lot of information and knowledge. Maybe, for some of you, you had a couple of blood vessels like explode from all the information. But look forward to seeing everybody on the next sessions, and hopefully see everybody out in Bali. But until then, stay strong and keep training hard.